Okay, great. So thank you all for coming. I want a little bit of a disclaimer. This is not a workshop. There we go. Lost it again. It's because I walk around. This isn't a workshop on After Effects, right? For those of you who want to know how to create a keyframe and animate, I'll give you some stuff at the end of this. We're gonna talk about sort of the philosophies of how After Effects has greatly influenced our process as we look at kind of building some cool and interesting web experiences. Also another disclaimer, I started my career in the animation and broadcast industry. My first gig was for the NFL Network when it first started. I was a freelancer for a shop called 5XB, which was contracted by Brand New School. And from there, I learned a lot, connected a lot. I learned about storytelling, narrative, linear processes, production processes. How do you take live action, composite it into a full 3D world? Jumped around, did a lot of art direction. Around this time, the HD TV channels were coming out. So my background was design, so I got to kind of play with how to brand these TV networks to be high definition, which was interesting and cool. Fast forward a couple of years, and this really fancy tool called Flash came out. Well, it had been out for a while, but was really starting to come mainstream. Fell in love with a girl. That girl moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, so I followed that there, which is, at that point, called up my old buddy from college, from university. His background was computer science. We formed a company, met a lot, again, in the broadcast industry, a lot of contacts, and we built a business around Flash websites. And this was great. I kind of think of myself as Batman sometimes. I know all of you do, so don't judge. And Flash was my Batmobile. Fast forward to today, and Batman's getting his ass kicked by modern browser technology. So I want to talk a little bit about that and kind of how my history has really brought some passion and influence and processes to what we do on the web and how it may be a little different than what I hear a lot at conferences today. A couple of months ago, I went and sat next to a front-end developer at the shop, and I said, "Hey, man, show me your build stack." And that's like the thing we all do. We have beers and we talk about our stack. But this was really just kind of blew my mind. It was like, okay, Effects Composer, what is that? And it's kind of this, if you worked at 3JS, this another layer that you can put on as JavaScript that actually does post-processing on top of whatever you're doing. And basically it's kind of tricking the browser into doing a lot of post-compositing techniques that After Effects does. So this kind of brought in this really interesting concept of, man, our entire job nowadays, especially if we want to push it on the web, is just basically hacking the browser. Our job is just trying to get the browser to do what we want to do. And there's a really great podcast, if you guys are into podcasts. That seems to be like print is dead, podcast is dead. But I drive a lot, so I do listen. And Rachel Andrew, who is probably one of the few people in the world right now talking about grid layout, which is a new kind of mysterious framework that's loaded with AI and all different modes in which we basically transform a way in which we use CSS. So it's interesting stuff, but I see this interesting revolution happening as these new frameworks come out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about After Effects. I'm going to talk about processing. I do so by highlighting a project, and then I'm going to get into techniques of how my background in animation, per se, has led to some best practices. This is a project for a company called Johnson Health Tech, and they make, in a brand matrix, they make health and fitness equipment, not the stuff that you can go kind of buy on your own and have in your house, but for Gold's Gym and some of these higher-end YMCA. I don't know if you have these here. I'm from the States. But anyways, big fitness equipment that really for pro use, more of a B2B market. And they had a need to actually do an installation in one of their trade shows and integrate this installation into their sales team across the world. And so the brief that I got was, okay, we need this really cool web-based interactive installation that works on an 85-inch touchscreen and can be responsive, was the buzzword, adapted down to a 9-inch tablet. So you get those briefs and you kind of like throw up in your mouth a little bit, and you're like, we're kind of stressing about just making a desktop, respond down to a mobile phone, and this is a whole different ball of wax. So of course we followed kind of our web dev process, waterfall process. We did sketching, content IA, content inventory, trying to figure out what exactly we're intending to communicate, who the users are, did some personas. We built a fully interactive prototype using Bootstrap to say, okay, this is working. We know this process is how we do things. And we got to this point in the process, and we were all just feeling really kind of depressed. We weren't really excited about this. We knew that this would work really well for the tablet, but we weren't really touching the immersion in the experience that needed to happen in a trade show booth, particularly on an 85-inch touchscreen. So we said, stop. And said, we know we have these tools at our disposal that we'd actually sort of bring into our process early on and question how we might be doing things and how we can be doing things. So we took a day, actually less than a day, myself and another animator, we jumped into After Effects, and we took all the knowledge that we had gained over working with the content and the process and interacting with the client, and we said, let's just experiment, let's just play, let's just prototype without any boundaries or handcuffs of what code libraries we might use or what technologies we might use. And we created this, presented to the client. The first sketch, and we call them motion sketches, the first sketch was actually based on gaming consoles like PS4 when you open up the screen, these really nice menu systems. And the second one was trying to figure out how a way to get a sense of dimensionality into the experience. Can anybody tell me which one the client chose? You guys are whispering. I can't hear you. What? The second one. Yeah, everybody says that. Every conference I go to is the second one. And I don't know what it is about this idea of Z depth. By the way, if you come into a client room, especially in an interactive world, and you just say Z depth, your IQ jumps like 400%. It's crazy. It's amazing. So the point I want to make here is that we kind of stopped our process, our normal process of how we might prototype or think or develop a web-based interactive experience, and said, something is not working. We need a solve. We need another angle. And motion became that tool for us. This project is about 1.5 years old, and it really came a pivotal point, changing point in the company in terms of how we evaluate, how we look, and how we're using tools to kind of push some of our ideas forward. It was so powerful that it actually greatly influenced the design. So to this point, we hadn't actually pushed any pixels or even kind of dealt with the brand or talked about the design in any way. That kind of box flip concept brought into light some opportunities of a user experience that, as I navigate through these dimensional frames, I might lose a sense of my way, of where I'm coming from and where I'm going. So color became a solve in terms of a wayfinding system for the design. The design actually ended up being something like this, really beautiful, strong, powerful, simple, but all about that sort of interaction focused in the center of the screen. And what I really love about this slide and kind of the process is that if I were to hand an interaction designer a wireframe, those wireframes that we saw before, they would have never come up with this solution. There was something about actually exploring and discovering in a very rapid prototyping manner, whatever tool you use, After Effects or not. After Effects is just easy for us to kind of just put everything away and explore the unknown. Strongly influences design in a huge way. The other thing that came out of, we actually didn't re-prototype this. I don't have a screenshot of that. Here's the design as we get down into, excuse me, different, I need a drink, audience segments. So they have different products. This is the meathead section. And then more of a hospitality, feminine approach. You can see this little tilted hamburger at the bottom left. I don't think I have, no, I don't have an example of that. I can't go back. Keynote has hijacked me. But the hamburger at the bottom left of the screen was actually came out of user testing and when we redid the prototype, in that if I have this 85-inch touchscreen and the sales guy's there with the customer at the booth, they would actually have to reach their hand over and touch that cube system, and it became very destructive in the communication process that the experience was intended to be. So we realized that our personas were inaccurate. We were thinking solely of the user and not the actual sales experience. We had to expand our personas to say what would happen, what the user interaction would be like if there were a conversation happening. So the little hamburger at the left opens up, and it becomes basically a remote control for the sales guy that auto-navigates those cube panels as they go through. So user testing is still amazing. After Effects doesn't solve everything, but it gets you to this place where you can do some amazing discovery. I'll skip this slide. That was kind of for another talk. This kind of brings us into really, as I said, Batman getting his ass kicked in modern browser. It got to a point probably right before this project where I was thinking of actually getting back into the broadcast industry. I was incredibly frustrated by the limitations and the methodologies and the conversations having around where the web was going and how, what I call the bootstrap effect, how everything sort of just was losing its soul until Google came out with their material design. And what, not that it's cool and fancy and there's a lot of great motion to it, but that they actually took a stand and said, we're going to put motion at the heart of our brand. This was incredibly inspiring and really profound, and gave me a sort of seed of hope that, wow, as we push the web forward and as we think about interactive experiences and narrative in the web-based mindset, that things might be shaping up, and we're going to see some change as we move forward. So some of that material design effect as you leave the grid system and go into actually content pages, we're really purposefully sort of pulling the user into those spaces, and then sort of get into content. Here's the actual system. This is all running in Chrome, in a web browser, just gone full screen. And I'm not blowing smoke. It's working pretty amazing. You can see the side nav at the left, how it's auto adjusting itself. So they kind of play off of each other in really cool ways. Here that is responded, really adapted down to the tablet. A lot of things we had to sort of pull back on in terms of transitions and motions, but the core elements are all there. So that's just one example. I'm going to go through a couple of tasty nuggets of where just using After Effects as a prototyping tool has allowed us to kind of have conversations and dialogue about purpose-driven animation in this kind of web world. The first one, obviously, for any of those are animators or just getting into animation, I think more so for this talk, is how we're actually applying those traditional principles of animation to interaction design. And I go to a lot of talks, and I hear a lot of talks about, hey, apply the principles of animation. And nobody really, they explain the principles, but I think we're having a hard time making a connection to how they actually apply and maybe are rewritten for the needs of interaction. So I use a mobile device here, just kind of keep it in a simple conversation. Ease everything. We'll move on from there. Staging. Staging is hugely important. I think it's the number 2 principle that we often forget when we're engaging in interactive experiences. And what I mean by staging is this concept that if, for example, if I came down and took that laptop and just threw it, right, it wouldn't just kind of fall on the ground and nothing else happen. It would probably hit 2 people on the head, blood would spatter, and somebody would scream, and then 4 chairs would go flying, right? There's this exciting moment that happens when you interact in the real world. I kind of want to do it now just to see what happens. But this is a concept of sort of staging. There's a cause and an effect, right? A call and response. That when a user clicks, say the hamburger, for example, I'll try to keep this real simple, that the back panel of that menu system comes out first, which actually pulls the menu in. And the hamburger doesn't change until I'm intending the user to actually use it in a different state. So there's a staging, there's a mentality to this, a clear planning to how that animation is triggered off. So when the user clicks it, it feels as if they are actually causing a real experience, a real call and response. And it's very important. I think philosophy that we often forget and don't think about. The other big one is timing. We talk a lot about performance on the web. It's hugely important, and animation is usually the first thing that's taken out because it is expensive in terms of the browser. But I think aside from that, and there are a lot of techniques and tools actually enhancing and creating efficiencies in performance when you're adding animation, but that aside, oftentimes I'll hit experiences where it's not a performance issue that I'm having a problem with, it's actually just horrible timing. Whether or not you just throw an easing library on there and you don't really think about or tweak any of the variables or parameters about what that easing is actually doing to the experience. And so I'm an animator, when I click the menu system, it's like bullet time. Open. And it's kind of like, I'm very animated, by the way. I'm trying to hold back. But it's like you've lost the user at that point. There's just too much going on. And you're not, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, you're thinking about it. But when a user clicks, they need to react. It needs to be an instant response, but without losing that sense of friction or easing and sort of pulling and stop. So timing is incredibly important. Never forget those elements. And then the icing on the cake, and I'm not showing you all 12 principles of animation. I'm pulling out the ones that I feel really relevant for interaction design, is anticipation and follow-through. So this is a simple example. As I pull down my search result, I'm going to load more, whatever application you have. The loader icon pops in. But you can see, and it's very subtle, as that loader pops in, there's a blip. It's kind of an anticipation saying something's happening. And when it's done loading, there's another blip. They say it's now concluded. Those things are very subtle, but to a user's eye, it's incredibly important and powerful in that indicator that something is actually happening in these moments. And I don't feel like it's broken or it's jaggy or laggy and so on and so forth. Oh, the other point I wanted to make, kind of staging, is where humans are just adept to understanding real space because we were born in this world and we've lived throughout our whole lives and we understand relationships of objects with one another. It's incredibly important. Staging is a part of this. So if I actually walk kind of from over here, I'm seeing the heads, and holy crap, the audience is parallaxing. We can say what we want about parallax websites, but we're really adept to seeing this effect happen in real life. And it's sort of the idea of why they chose motion sketch number 2. There's a dimensionality to this. It's very responsive. We react to it in I'm going to use the word, a sense of delight. And there's something powerful to that. And really it goes around staging, that objects have a true relationship with each other. And as animators, we need to really understand those relationships and how we can leverage those to our benefit. Think in terms of states. This is sort of a disease that a lot of classically trained designers have, but a true attribute of user experience designers and a lot of developers, because they have to think 5 steps ahead. I think Caleb, one of our developers in the office actually said to me one day, he says, here's a project. How are you going to approach this? And he says, well, I'm going to figure it all out in my head before I actually start coding. And a designer's the other way around. So I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump into Photoshop and just start rocking it out, right? And those processes, there's not a right or wrong. It's just a different way of thinking. And I think one of the things that's really important when we talk about sort of philosophies of motion is this idea of state-based thinking. So this phone, for example, and it's not so much with a phone in terms of eye tracking. We do some user tests because, you're relatively close to the screen. The screen's relatively small. But on desktop, this happens a tremendous amount, a lot. So the user lands on this page, and their eye kind of starts in the middle, and they kind of scroll. The sort of eyeball goes up and comes down and clicks that piece of content at the bottom right. There's a true intent sort of eye flow of how users might engage in a layout and the content within. State-based thinking is really thinking about not just that single page, but how the user is going to flow through multiple pages. And so you have this sort of experience effect that I start at the top of the page, my eyeball kind of comes down, and I don't like what I'm seeing. I come up to sort of that second piece of content, click it. As that second page loads in, my eye is generally around the same area in which I clicked. You do some user tests, you can see this effect actually happening. And what happens is, depending on how that page loads, janky, just kind of goes away, comes in, transitions, my eye will go back up to the top to sort of orient, where am I at? And come down, and now I'm interested in the bottom right. As I click that, reloads in, my eye is generally around the bottom right of the screen because that was the moment where I was interested in, so on and so forth. So this idea of states, that it's not about the single page that I'm interested in designing or orchestrating, but how I'm flowing through those as a series. This is an example of a banking client that we had, and we were doing some After Effects motion prototyping around how we can enhance this experience and looking at a retail locator, so different bank locations and how to navigate through that. Maps have been done over and over again, but we felt that there was this kind of disconnect or void in how people might traverse in and out of different selections on the map. And this is a perfect example of thinking about when I select the first location, the map doesn't go away or slide away like we see a lot in mobile, but it actually shrinks up, and my eye is drawn up and reassures that that element that I clicked, I'm still there. I'm still within that space. Third tip, tasty nugget, animating nested divs. This kind of comes from, for me, the broadcast industry. We use it a lot in Flash by having nested movie clips within movie clips. But this is a SVG graphic that's animated on a page with CSS, and very simple, right? And there's an ease applied. You can see the div container that wraps that element. So the animation is applied to the object. Now we actually apply animation to the container, right? And let me remove the div or the border. And what happens is you get this really interesting, complex animation by using very simple animation techniques. Where you just have you're animating the object within and you're animating the container, right? And you can create this really complicated movement. This is a very basic example, but using high performance and easy tools at our disposal. You can use this technique in a lot of different ways. Fourth tasty nugget is this day and age where we're at, and yeah, I see this more moving in the future. We talk about VR and installation work, development versus layout versus content design. All of these things are kind of this gooey mess that's sort of merging together. And I want to show you a couple examples about if we think about all of this stuff in a single moment in our process, there's some powerful things that can come of it. Excuse me. I'm dying here. No Nonsense is a brand that makes tights and leggings. You guys heard of this company? No, it's not here, and I don't know. They sell them in Walmarts all over the States. And about 2 years ago, they came to us because there was this perception that the brand had really were just for more an older demographic, and they needed to kind of insert this sort of younger demographic, this younger audience in the brand and sort of create an awareness around it. So they came to us to sort of help with this because we were a digital agency, not because we had any insights of how to do some traditional marketing, but that we knew how to sort of target in a digital space. And so what was great about this process is that we understand how to build websites, build banners, we understood where all of this content lived and the constraints in around that because we had a hybrid creative content and dev team in-house. And so the first thing we did was saying, hey, if you're buying an ad, if you got a big media buy and you have all these different ad units, you've got limitations in terms of sizes, skyscrapers, and I apologize, sometimes I get paid to do the ads that you try to block. Sorry. But it pays the bills, and we get to work with some cool brands. But we know that fold outs and all of these attributes of media placement. And so we said, hey, we're going to put the models in live scale boxes of what our grid layout's going to be, what our website's going to be. We're actually going to force them into our virtual grid. And so we built these boxes at aspect ratio scaled sizes of what the web would be. And it's funny, the model would step out, and I'd be like, get back in. You're going to break the internet. What are you doing? But the point is that content creation was actually dramatically influenced by how we knew in the process of actually developing these things in production. The other thing is having a developer and designer in the room together and a content creator creates efficiencies. Bringing motion in early, whether using After Effects or not, can actually save time and money. This is an example of a client, Honeywell. They don't make the F-16 fighter, but they make all the peripherals. It's kind of like Pimp My Jet, in a way. And so they had come to us to brief. They wanted this WebGL product that kind of spun around in real time, but they wouldn't compromise on visual integrity or fidelity of the actual product. And so we just, you guys know if you've worked in WebGL, the serious limitations just basically on browsers, the performance being able to render this stuff. So we weren't hitting both of those requirements. And of course, the first thing you do is, hey, we can't do this. This is impossible. So we got in the room for like 20, 30 minutes and said, what can we do? And the animator said, you know what, I could render out the jet kind of spinning in this, not just sort of 360, but kind of bending a little bit. And then, what could we do with that as a sort of a flat movie? And the developer said, you know what, if I actually click and drag a positive X value, we'll play the movie forward. Click and drag a negative X value, we'll play the movie backwards. And so we come up with a solution that, from a development standpoint, took only less than an hour to build, and completely fooled the client. They thought they were actually spinning the jet in real three-dimensional space, when it actually was just a polished movie that was being played forward and backward. So this kind of hybrid cohabitation and collaboration can actually come up with some really powerful solutions. I said I didn't have music, but I lied. The last example, I think it's the last, or second to last example, was installation that we did at a university where every floor of the building was a different screen or different installation. The bottom floor was a single. I think the second floor was a double. The third floor was three screens wide. And because of budget, we had to take the whole responsive process mentality to how are we going to make this content go from 1 to 3 screens and have sort of the same build system. And we a lot of that was easy to do, but we use After Effects to kind of prototype how we might bring these things to life and how they might adapt from a single to a 3-panel screen. The biggest problem was content. And again, kind of having those different disciplines in the room at the same time, early on in the process, having this dialogue. This was powered by WordPress. Yes. And really because the client needed to be able to edit it from anywhere in the world, and they were familiar with the CMS. And it didn't really matter to us what content management tool we used. But the client said, I kind of went into the room, I said, okay, content. Early on, what is the content conversation? How are you going to create content to put in this site, knowing that they were going to update it themselves? I said, I'm just going to go out into the yard and my iPhone, take a picture of the student and upload it. Suddenly, I'm the creative guy. I'm like, throw up in my mouth again. So we had this huge creative challenge of how we were going to ensure that content acquired in that manner could look beautiful at 6,000 pixels wide. And so the developer came, we sat down and said, I need help. What are we going to do? And we have been doing a lot of work around responsive imagery, having multiple size imagery sort of load in based on media query. They said, what if we did they uploaded an image, and the front end would actually take that same image, scale it and shift it over, and scale it and shift it down, such that we weren't taking a single image and scaling it across 3 screens. We were actually creating this crystallization effect of a relatively low image size, and it worked out beautifully. And lastly, and this really is, again, the power of After Effects and kind of pre-visualizing what we could possibly do. I grew up in Florida, and I've had some ties and connections with a lot of friends down there. There's a big power company called Florida Power and Light, and they had a trade show exhibit where they wanted to kind of align the brand with the future of smart energy. And so they come up, really was about educating their consumers on all of the different devices and technologies that you can integrate into your home to save energy. And it was kind of funny, like they make their money by you buying a lot of energy from them, but anyways, it was sort of a brand lift, brand perception, and educational experience. So we use After Effects to say, how can we actually see the future of these devices? A lot of these devices that we can get nowadays, refrigerators, thermostats, the Nest, actually provide a lot of information and data to us, but they don't do it in a way which we can see in real time, unless, strap it on HoloLens or we have some kind of second screen. So we, in a way, a marketing gimmick type of way, we simulated by the use of iPad and AR what the future of the home might look like if you had this second screen. And we used After Effects. We had a huge problem kind of understanding this technology, and used After Effects to sort of previs and explore what these things might be. And I think as we move into the future, we actually, not web, we couldn't get the browser to do this. We ended up using Unity to actually run the actual environment that you see here. But as we see the browsers becoming more capable, we're going to start having to ask these questions of how we're going to build these experiences and how do we actually use tools. The last tip, I know I'm kind of digressing, going all over the place, I apologize, is motion is design. One of the, I think, basic examples of this is if you're a front-end developer, use CSS a lot, translate properties. One specific one that stands out to me is the skew, Y, and X. And this property is really was originally created for animation, that you can kind of skew and bend things, two-dimensional things. But I love this not as an animation tool, but as an ability to actually skew design, actually take this sort of bootstrap, boxy internet and kind of give it a little shift, a little bit of soul back into it. This is a simple, very fast-performing technique that's not animation, but actually something that spawned from animation that encourages, I think, some unique possibilities on the web. Another example of actually motion encouraging design, as I said before, was the Matrix project. And then here's a couple of other examples of projects that we've done. I'm out of time. Keep going. Oh, I'm out of time, but I can keep going. Oh, it's 30 minutes. I have 45 minutes. That's great. That's fantastic. I'm actually talking too fast, but there'll be some time for Q&A. This is an example of other websites that we've used After Effects to previs that has gone back between the animator and the designer, and actually massage and working with content and content creation all over, from pharmaceutical companies to travel and tourism. It's been really beneficial to us. Some of it doesn't make it to live production. By the way, we're not pumping out After Effects GIFs or animations into a live environment. We're simply using After Effects as a prototyping tool. It's very important. I think as we move into the future, whether it's grid framework or some of these other techniques, more Unity, what happens with VR and Oculus, After Effects may actually be brought back in as a tool for live production, but currently I'm really suggesting it as a powerful tool for rapid discovery and breaking the mold, breaking out of this kind of code library restriction that we have right now and seeing what is possible very quickly. Some principles that I want to leave you with as in summary. Ease. Just ease it. It's not hard. Just do it, please. It's all about creating the illusion of life, right? And this is a simple technique. But don't forget about staging and timing as you're adding those attributes. Just don't add it and walk away. Add it and really massage that. Motion is not decoration. I've shown a lot of cool, pretty candy stuff here, but all of it is done, even in the prototyping phase, with a sense of intent. Intent about how the user might interact with it, how they might react with it, how it might affect browser performance, so on and so forth. It's expensive. By no means. There's a lot of talks here. I'm actually humbled and sort of intimidated by some of the smart minds here. There's actually a talk, I think, either tonight or tomorrow night, a motion designer and developer walk into a bar for Firstborn. It's amazing. So this conversation is happening a lot. It's percolating. But it's not in the absence of it truly is expensive, not just on the cost and budget and the talent, the collaboration it takes to kind of push the web forward nowadays, but also on the browser, the actual user's computer who has to actually take this down, load it fast, and render it. We have to weigh those costs and how we might use those and iteratively step forward in how we push the web. Hold back. We use After Effects to really just push our limit, to really explore without any constraints. But then there's a second process to that where we actually say, okay, let's pull back. The Matrix project, for example, you saw that there were squares. They were solid filled colors. There's a little bit of opacity to that, so the background image would come through. But the original concept was actually those grids to have an image inside of them, a different image inside of them. And when we did our prototyping within Chrome, we kept crashing the browser because it couldn't render all of those different bitmap images as they were going through dimensional space. So that testing kind of had to, okay, hold back, Ron. I wanted to put video into those cubes, I was like, let's go. Hold back, right? Don't compromise performance as you're trying to push things. And then avoid modular thinking. I gave this talk in Columbia, South Carolina 2 days ago, and I said, Brad Frost's atomic design is poison to animation. And it's like, I also said I didn't believe in responsive design. It was like, the earth was shaking, And I don't mean that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of atomic design and atomic principles. The problem I have is that a lot of designers and interaction designers sort of think of it as modular design, that I'm going to design these different modules of my layout, which based on user tests or performance are going to get randomly put together, right? This modular thinking, what happens is we stop to think about the whole picture, the whole stage, that as we look at a page or an experience, all of these elements are related to each other. And so, yes, there's efficiencies in thinking atomically and thinking about different modulars, but not in absence of the context or the relationship of the whole page, especially in mobile. Looking forward. I love this conference because I'm really confused by who it's for. And you know what I'm feeling. You know what I'm talking about. But it's super exciting because it's about kind of creative technology. It's about this hybridness of passion and motion and design and good user experience and development. And there's all this kind of questions and exploration happening nowadays. And it brings into this kind of light of, Ron, what are you? I don't know. I'm a designer who likes motion. Article came out probably 6 months ago in Fastco that was titled Coders Should Code, Designers Should Design. And there's this myth of this conversation of, man, I've got to learn everything I can, go to school, get an internship, become that full stack designer developer who can soup to nuts build something. And I think it's hot right now and it pays well, but as we see the web evolve, we see sort of different technologies and techniques change, I believe more and more in this, that there comes a point where you need to grab onto a passion and start to specialize. But the other core of this article was about empathy, that to be successful as we move forward, whether you use After Effects or not, was to be empathetic to the needs of the teams that you're working around and their processes. And in that, I talk about a lot of collaboration of different minds coming together to create these things. It isn't an absence of having a deep empathy for the challenges that each of us face as we do our special tasks within the project. The other, I think, big trend that's hitting right now is John Maeda's talk, I think it's South by Southwest this year. I wasn't there, but it was kind of a state of the union in design tech. And he classified what design was, because I'm like on this big search. What is design? Where am I? And he broke it down into classical design, design thinking, and computational design. You can read the descriptions, Google it. There's a lot of literature around it. But I've always sort of found myself on the classical design side of things. Everything has to be pixel perfect, and there's a lot of antithesis around how agile mentality, how users are actually influencing, how users are choosing the right design, not the designer, and how data is transforming how we might arrange and do things moving forward. But the interesting footnote was that to be successful in the future, and he's talking specifically about businesses, but I actually want to reflect it onto you as individuals in your career. You need at least 2 of these to be successful as we move forward, right? So sort of ponder that, whether you're a developer and really into data, whether you're a user experience designer and thinking most about the experience in the user, or whether you're just a classical designer, and I put animators in this bucket as well. Where are you? And are you absorbing enough information to sort of own at least 2 of those? And we listened to the gentleman from IBM talk this morning. If you have all of it, you're going to be a rock star moving into the future. So the point being, in a lot of ways, we will become more specialized. And to that extent, the general world design will mean something very different, almost in a way diluted. And we'll have to qualify that at some point in our careers and in ourselves, is finding a passion, grabbing onto it. That passion is going to actually push you to stay till 2 or 3 in the morning and get something amazing out, versus trying to learn something that maybe you're kind of passionate about but don't really embrace. So in that, I'm a motion designer who freaking loves the web, and I'm totally stoked to be here at FITC, and just thank you all for listening to me ramble and rant. If you do have any interest in living in the States, and specifically Charlotte, North Carolina, all the work you've seen here is done at a killer shop called Untold. We are hiring rapidly. Prototyping with After Effects is a new course on O'Reilly, so if you really were interested in getting to the gritty of how to use After Effects for all of the stuff that I've shown today, go check out this course. Shoot me a tweet. I'll give you a sweet promotional discount. And that's it. Thank you all.